Hello, everyone, and thanks for hanging out with us for the Behind the Numbers weekly Listen and eMarketer podcast made possible by Newstar. This is the Friday show that reviews the most stunning media news stories of the week. I'm your host, Marcus Johnson. In today's show, how to rein in Facebook.
Fundamentally, it's going to require a shift on the part of consumer expectations about online services and their proclivity to be free. Companies can't monetize their users based on data. They'll have to figure out another business model, which might include charging them.
A new social media model.
I think this is more like a top-down idea from someone who has a lot of money and thinks he can solve the world's problems with his money.
The customer experience gap.
It's always kind of funny how, the main job of advertisers to understand consumer behavior, yet they seem to fail a lot of the time at understanding or grasping the actual perception of the consumer.
Reevaluating thought leadership. The death of the 5-day work week. And why dogs are the best. Because they are. All right, folks, joining me for this episode, we have three people. Let's introduce them. We'll start with Rahul Chadha. He is one of our directors of reports editing.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, chap. We also have joining us Paul Werner, who heads up the advertising and media practice and is our principal analyst covering TV and video.
Great to be here, though I have to say this is the one day of the week that I'm not working because I'm shifting to a 4-day work week, so I'll see you guys next time.
Take it easy, Paul.
No, don't go anywhere. We need... Stay still. Finally, we have Blake Josh, who is one of our analysts on the retail and e-commerce team.
Nice to see everyone, and I'm here 7 days a week, putting it all in.
He's
So.
barely
Throwing
here
it
2
down.
days. Don't listen to him. All right, folks, what do we have in store for you this week? We have the story of the week, which is how to rein in Facebook. That's where we begin today's episode. We move to the game of the week, where our contestants, Blake, Rahul, and Paul, will go head to head to give us the best takes they possibly can from each of the 4 stories to win pretend points to win a pretend championship belt. We then move to working from somewhere, where we discuss this new hybrid working situation that some of us are in. And then we move to dinner party data. We talk about random things we've just recently learned. We start with the story of the week, how to rein in Facebook. Facebook is facing a historic crisis. Revelations brought to light from whistleblower Frances Haugen, a former data scientist at Facebook, has led to what may be the most threatening scandal in the company's history, writes Bobby Allen of NPR. He notes that Haugen's recent testimony to the Senate subcommittee offered a clear and detailed glimpse inside the notoriously secretive tech giant, showing how Facebook harms kids, sows division, promotes polarizing reactions, and undermines democracy in pursuit of breakneck growth and astronomical profits. Shirin Ghaffari of Recode notes that in the past, congressional hearings about Facebook have often descended into political grandstanding as lawmakers spend the time venting about partisan grievances. But this time, lawmakers were notably focused and well-studied on the relevant issues at hand. Ms. Ghaffari notes that in return, Ms. Haugen was an eloquent witness, breaking down complicated topics in an accessible manner to clearly explain to Congress and the public what's wrong with Facebook and how these issues can be fixed. In Ms. Ghaffari's recent article, she outlines the various ways that Frances Haugen's testimony offered clear paths forward on how to address Facebook's harms. We're going to rattle through some of them. And the first one, create an outside regulatory agency. So basically, this agency could have the power to request data from Facebook, particularly about how its algorithms work and the kind of content they amplify, similar to how cars and cigarettes have independent researchers who can evaluate health effects. However, the public at the minute cannot do the same with Facebook. So, gents, this first suggestion of creating an outside regulatory agency, your thoughts?
I think it's a great idea in theory, but when I think back to the way cars and cigarettes were regulated, and I think now about things like COVID vaccines or social media, I think the difference is that our society is just so polarized that there doesn't seem to be any way to arrive at a consensus about just about anything, even when the dangers are very clear, as I think they are in this case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, it's going to be really interesting because once there is a regulatory body to tackle social media, that it's not just going to be Facebook that's going to fall under scrutiny, that all of its competitors are going to have to be treated fairly, which is going to make a company like TikTok, which is owned by a Chinese company, it's going to potentially open up a larger can of worms because it's not just Facebook that doesn't necessarily want to cooperate or be under regulation. It's going to have to be all of these social networks and tech companies. So reining in everyone is going to be very difficult, and then it's going to become not just a Facebook problem to solve.
Yeah, the article noted that Facebook has this existing quasi-independent oversight board, but it's got no real legal power over Facebook because Ms. Haugen believing that it's kind of blind to Facebook's inner workings. The second suggestion was about Facebook's algorithms. Should they no longer operate in a... Oh, I meant to press the bell. What a sham. This is already going terribly. Facebook, the second thing we're going to be talking about, Facebook's algorithms should no longer operate in a black box that only Facebook controls and understands, and that they must be scrutinized and regulated. Gents, thoughts on Facebook's algorithm?
I think the question I have is how much of a resistance is Facebook going to put up in terms of sharing what they probably deem to be proprietary information or practice. Yep. And then the other question I have really is just the requirement on the part of legislators and regulators to have the technological literacy to understand really what does this algorithm do, how can we change it, and how should it be regulated. There's, I think, a bunch of stories about lawmakers asking really confused questions to people in the tech industry that seem to reflect the idea they don't really understand how these businesses work.
And to Blake's point, anything that any regulatory body would do to force Facebook to open its algorithms would also apply to Twitter and TikTok and YouTube and potentially a lot of other companies down the line. So yeah, it's not a Facebook problem. It's a wider problem.
Yeah, I wonder if they can say, these rules just apply to the biggest of companies, because a lot of these things, to your point, they are going to have to, be enacted for a lot of those smaller players, and that can be quite a worrying situation. However, if you just have rules for the bigger guys, maybe that's a way of getting around some of this stuff. The third thing that was proposed was privacy, which wasn't one of Haugen's key focuses during the testimony, but several lawmakers, Senator Amy Klobuchar, Senator Marsha Blackburn, Ed Markey, some others, brought up the need for better federal privacy regulation. This, I think, one of our predictions at the start of the year, that we might see or would see some kind of a federal privacy regulation at some point this year. Gents, your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think it's a good idea, but I think fundamentally it's going to require a shift on the part of consumer expectations about online services and their proclivity to be free. Companies can't monetize their users based on data. They'll have to figure out another business model, which might include charging them.
Yeah, I think that the dirty secret about privacy is people get horrified when they learn just how their data is harvested and used. But yeah, to Rahul's point, like the alternative is either you pay for it or it's limited in what it can do. And it cuts both ways. And I'm a big proponent of people safeguarding their privacy, but I also know that human nature is such that the reason we got to where we are isn't entirely the fault of the platforms.
Yeah, and I think it's also at this point, it just gets political. Creating, a bipartisan federal regulatory act is, even though there's support on both sides of the aisle, as a lot of the discussions around Facebook this week have doubled down on, is that the two different parties have very different ideas as to what needs to be done with tech companies, and something that would, a bill of this magnitude to create a federal law for data privacy, even though it's in the interest of both parties, could still be very difficult to achieve.
Yep, yeah. Good luck with that.
Number 4. Reforming Section 230, but focusing on algorithms. Haugen proposed regulators modify Section 230 to make companies legally liable for their algorithms promoting harmful content rather than specific user posts. Interesting thought. Gents, what do you think?
I think it's one of those things with the language is still not specific enough that when you leave any type of regulatory body to determine what is harmful and what is not harmful content, then I think it goes back to what Paul's initial comment was, is that to the fact that we're so divided as a culture, you're going to have a very difficult time getting everybody on the same page, even to just create that very basic foundation of, is this content harmful and should it not be promoted via this algorithm? That it's going to be, very difficult in any case other than a very extreme cut and dry, situation of hate speech and violence. But even that, as we've seen in the past, there are conflicting opinions about what constitutes what type of speech.
Yes, indeed. Jens, finally on the lead here on the story of the week, Does this feel different to you? So, Blake, as you mentioned, it does seem that politicians at least appear more united than normal. Miss Celia Kang of the New York Times was saying after years of congressional hearings on Facebook and other large tech companies, Miss Haugen's appearance stood out not only for the inside look, but the way that she united Republican and Democratic lawmakers around tackling the issue of the platform's harm to teenagers. There's also the fact that there's evidence from within now. These lawmakers said Ms. Haugen's testimony and thousands of pages of documents that she'd gathered from the company. Does it feel like something's different at this moment, or are we just, we've been here before?
It sort of feels like something's different, but I felt that way when the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, where I thought, this is it. This is a game changer, and it was not a game changer. Nothing happened. So, I think some further discussion will come out of this, and maybe some attempts at regulation and a little bit of maybe even, measures by Facebook to at least put on a front of more accountability. But at the end of the day, I think there's just too much money at stake, too many powerful interests who want to defend the status quo. And I just don't see this as something that is going to have the kind of consequences that I think Frances Haugen and others would like.
Yeah, so end with this. Cecilia Kang of the New York Times was citing Alan Brandt, professor at Harvard and an expert on the rise and decline of the tobacco industry. He said, Facebook took a big hit this week, but they are capable of taking many hits, just as the tobacco industry was. It took more than 50 years, 50, from the first published research about the dangers of cigarettes and more than a decade after a whistleblower shared internal documents proving that the tobacco companies hid its knowledge of the ills of their products before there was meaningful government regulation. We shall see. That's all we've got time for the story of the week. Time now for the game of the week. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, Newstar. Are you prepared for marketing's next chapter? You won't want to miss Brave New Worlds 2021, the virtual marketing and analytics event of the year on November 9th and 10th. Join Brave New Worlds to learn how you can adapt to the forces redefining advertising. It's free, and you'll hear from today's top minds in marketing, data, and analytics, including executives from Facebook, General Motors, Capgemini, Publicis, and more. Go to bravenewworlds.newstar to register today. Right, folks, we are back. It's time now for the game of the week. Today's game, what's the point? Part of the show where we read out full stories and have our contestants, Blake, Rahul, and Paul, tell us what they think is the main takeaway of the story. Okay answers get 1 point. Good answers will get you 2. And how do you do it? Answers get you 3 points. Each person gets 20 seconds to answer before they hear this. Whoever has the most points after 4 rounds wins, gets the last word, where they can share anything they want. So we'll start with Rahul. A new social media model is where we begin. Round 1. Real estate billionaire and former LA Dodgers owner Frank McCourt wants to build a new model for social media, writes Emily Babrow of the Wall Street Journal. Mr. McCourt's Project Liberty is a $250 million attempt to remake the way we share information online. The project includes a plan to develop an ethical framework for new technology and a decentralized social networking protocol, or DSNP, a new open source blockchain-enabled protocol for managing internet data. Jack Dorsey, Twitter's CEO, is in the early stages of creating an open, decentralized standard for social media called Blue Sky. Some smaller social media companies like Steemit or Mastodon already use blockchain or alternative technologies. Mr. McCourt's vision is, if I said to you that you could have everything you have, but you will also own and control your own data, your privacy, you'll deal with actual people, not machines, and if you engage in ad tech, you'll be credited for your data, would you use it? He asks. Rahul, a new social media model, what's the point?
I think it's a great idea. I think the challenge is that how are you going to get users to adopt it? If you look at Facebook's 3 core products, which are, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, they all presented a novel kind of feature set and then relied on network effects to scale and grow their user bases. And I think it's even in that, it's worth noting that Facebook didn't build Instagram or WhatsApp. They actually acquired them. And I think that kind of underscores how difficult that process is.
Paul.
Yeah, to build on Rahul's point, there's no business model here. Facebook, even though they didn't launch an ad product, they started with the user experience. They always knew that they would leverage it somehow, and advertising was the inevitable way that would happen. So I think this is more like a top-down idea from someone who has a lot of money and thinks he can solve the world's problems with his money.
Blake.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea, but I don't have a lot of faith in the guy who bankrupted the Dodgers to be able to, reform the internet and create some utopic situation when, you took one of the largest markets in the nation and one of their most well-known teams and completely tanked them.
We move to our second round. We start with Paul, the customer experience gap. A new Harris poll sponsored by Redpoint Global asked about 1,500 consumers and 150 senior marketers about their perspectives on customer experience. Half of marketers thought they were delivering excellent customer experiences. Just a quarter of consumers agreed. Another study by marketing communications company R.R. Donnelley and Sons Company looked at the differences between marketer assumptions and what people say actually influences their brand awareness and purchase decisions. It found for 28% of folks, word of mouth was the preferred method for learning about a new brand, product, or service, beating social media 23%, cable TV 12%, and online digital ads 11%. Just 4% of marketers said word of mouth was a consumer preference for learning about new things. Word of mouth also had a higher research to purchase ratio than social media, online digital ads, or print ads. Paul, the customer experience gap, what's the point?
Well, I think we talked about this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, where the way things are marketed and designed and the way they actually play out in real life often are very, very different. And it's no surprise that consumers have a different perception of a lot of different platforms and the kind of experience they deliver. I'm also not surprised that word of mouth continues to rule the day among everyday people, even if businesses don't quite accept that or they sort of don't live by that creed, because I think a lot of decisions continue to be based on that. And the more people are skeptical about brands and tech platforms, the more they're going to rely on their peers, not the brands.
Blake.
Yeah, it's always kind of funny how, the main job of advertisers to understand consumer behavior, yet they seem to fail a lot of the time at understanding or grasping the actual perception of the consumer. So I think, the best advertisers and marketers are just the ones who are able to step outside of the bubble that we're all in and, see things the way that, the average person does and not those of us in the industry, because we obviously perceive things differently.
Rahul.
Yeah, I think the devil is in the details on this one for me, which is, the company that was quizzing people about customer experience. That's such a broad term. There's so many different touch points that businesses have with customers these days. Like, what is it specifically that they need to improve upon to get that customer experience rating up? Is it something that happens in the marketing? Is it during the checkout experience? Is it kind of a customer service aspect? So I think really if they could have drilled down a little bit more, it would have resulted in, I think, some more useful information.
We move to our third round. We start with Blake, Instagram TV. Instagram is combining its long-form video product IGTV with its in-feed videos. Notes Insider Intelligence analyst Nina Getson. Instagram Video, as it will now be called, can be found on a new combined video tab on users' profiles. Also, insights and metrics for the two kinds of videos will be merged. Blake, Instagram TV, what's the point?
I think Instagram is sick of getting embarrassed by having to copy TikTok every time they do something different. So they're trying to stay ahead of the fact that TikTok is going to start having longer form videos mixed in with their shorter form videos. So they are... What was the word that Nina used in her headline? Because it was a great word. It was...
De-bloat.
De-bloating. Yeah, the de-bloating is just try to stay one step ahead, but I think that's the right way to sum it up.
Rahul.
Yeah, I think my personal boycott of Instagram is already on the record at this point. So I don't know how this manifests in the app, but it did seem like what Nina was saying is that I think one of the main takeaways for me was Nina noted there's not a distinction between long and short form video that anybody can agree upon. So to me, it just seemed like, de-bloating, making the product maybe a little bit more user friendly. And, was that a distinction between long and short? Was that a distinction that was more useful to like Facebook's ad sales team than somebody who's actually using the app?
Paul.
It always seemed confusing to me that Instagram had videos in its regular feed, but also IGTV, and the delineation between the two was unclear at best. So if they're getting rid of that distinction, I think it can only help them.
Move to our final round. We start with Rahul, reevaluating thought leadership. COVID-19 led to a spike in thought leadership content production. Notes Insider Intelligence e-marketer briefing director Jeremy Goldman. However, nearly 4 out of 10 final decision makers couldn't keep up with all of the thought leadership content available, leaving the market to be oversaturated with the stuff, and 7 out of 10 said that less than half of all the thought leadership content they consume gives them valuable insights. It's from LinkedIn and Edelman. So Rahul, reevaluating thought leadership, what's the point?
I'm not a fan of the phrase thought leadership. I guess I should say that from the outset. I think it's just pretty jargony. I think fundamentally you're just really talking about content marketing. And if you're talking about content marketing, I think it's important to just dispense with the idea that this kind of content only needs to originate with a C-suite or executives, which I think is kind of implied when you talk about thought leadership. I think better if you're in B2B marketing, you need to look at your buyer personas, think about the in-house subject matter experts that can create something of value for one of them and generate your content from that perspective.
Paul.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about the phrase thought leadership. It always makes me cringe. And I think most of it is very self-serving. The phrase implies that you're kind of looking across the landscape, but really people are generally just putting out material that's just very narrow. It costs nothing to be a thought leader as opposed to like what it costs you in time and money to get like a master's or a PhD or anything else.
Blake.
Yeah, I completely agree with everyone else. I mean, it's just one of those overused terms that's been watered down so much. And I think particular probably in the last year and a half with, like LinkedIn and webinar fatigue and people trying to network and create a name for themselves within the industry without having the ability to physically network and go to events. I think that we're all just a little overwhelmed by all of the content coming at us from these quote unquote thought leaders.
Couldn't agree more. Whatever you guys decide to call it, Jeremy pointed to a few ways folks can stand out from the pack, citing some of that research from LinkedIn and Edelman. Number 1, make it fun. 9 out of 10 folks thought leadership materials can be both intellectually stimulating and even fun. Number 2, 8 out of 10 folks wanted thought-provoking insights that challenged their beliefs. Number 3, 8 out of 10 decision makers said they were looking for thought leadership materials that reference external data. Number 4, use a human tone, not an intellectual one.
I've never heard anyone say, take me to your thought leader.
Extra points for Paul. That's what we've got time for the game of the week. This week's winner, a drum roll. It wasn't enough points for Paul to win. It's Blake this week. Blake is this week's winner of the game of the week. Congratulations to him.
Thank you. I gotta say, I wasn't expecting it, but I guess that's what happens when I keep my answers short.
Yes. See what happens when you play by the rules?
Marcus is just so overwhelmed that I don't run over that I automatically win.
You also had some very funny answers today, which is mainly why you won, but also some really good points. Blake, you get the final word.
As a thought leader myself, I find it.
Here we go. Cut him off. Cut him off. Go on.
I don't know if I have anything to say other than
who wins the baseball this year?
I was going to say go Dodgers.
Yes. Yeah, extra points for Blake. I'm so glad that
They might be eliminated by the time this airs.
I was going to say, I got to say, I haven't been watching that much baseball this week. So, but I saw that the Red Sox are playing really well and have had some really good wins, and I hate to see that. So I'm gonna go with the opposite coast, and I'm gonna pull for the Dodgers on this one because originally, they're from New York, so I feel like we can all get behind that.
So are the Giants,
and
though.
They technically,
that's true.
Yeah. And they technically didn't win last year. Didn't count. They only played 40% of the regular season games. Doesn't count Dodgers. I'm sorry. I'm also a Dodgers fan, so it's just telling you how it is. So we've got time for the game of the week. Time now for Working From Somewhere. All right, folks. Part of the show where we talk about what it's like to work from somewhere. This week we're talking about the 5-day work week and people going back into the office a bit more. And if you do have to go back in, which days are best to go back in? So, number of workers returning to traditional office space has been edging higher since the week of Labor Day, when an average of 31% of the workforce was back in the 10 major cities monitored by Castle Systems. They track access card swipes, and it's Peter Grant of the Wall Street Journal. The average hit 35%, up from that 31% from Labor Day weekend, 35% during the week that ended October 1st, 36% the following week, a new high during the pandemic period. However, things aren't going back to the way they were. The 5-day work week is dead, writes Anna North of Vox, which is a tough pill to swallow since the 5-day work week was how we structured our lives, from vacations to wedding prices. Everything was built around it, and it's hard to imagine it any other way. But it wasn't always like this. The 9 to 5, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week or more schedule only became part of the American labor law in the 1930s. after decades of striking by labor activists who were tired of working the 14-hour days demanded by some employees. So, the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in 1938, which, among other things, required overtime pay for many employees if they worked more than 40 hours a week. Back in the summer, crowdfunding platform company Kickstarter said it plans next year to test a 4-day work week with some or all of its employees. Details to be determined, like will all workers have the same schedule. A recent study of shorter work weeks in Iceland was a big success, boosting worker well-being and even productivity. Workers had their hours cut, but not their pay, from 40 to 35 hours a week. Workers reported better work-life balance, lower stress, and greater well-being. Now, many Icelandic workplaces have embraced shorter hours, with 86% of the working population either working shorter hours already or on contracts that will phase in the reduction in the coming years. Gents, thoughts on a 4-day work week?
Well, I think it's hard to use Europe as an example because it's just a different culture where, most people in Europe take like a month off during the summer and they just haven't had this sort of cutthroat culture. I think any effort in the US toward a shorter work week is almost guaranteed to be followed by an equal and opposite reaction on the other side, and somebody making it cool again to, work 16-hour days and basically just try to be, just go in the other direction. So yeah, it's just hard to see it panning out. I do think there has been a change with the pandemic and people living their work lives a little bit more on their own terms, which I think is good. But I just don't know if it's going to get to the point where that pillar of the American work life, that 5-day work week, is just going to suddenly go away.
Yeah, and we have been working more. As of 2014, the average salaried worker worked 49 hours a week, according to Gallup, with 25% of people working over 60 hours a week. And working hours for many have gone up, not down, during the pandemic. So it seems like, yes, we've taken on more work already. So the idea of getting rid of a whole day, I guess, where do those hours go? Do they get sandwiched into the other days that people are already working 10, 12 plus hours? Or the company's going to take that hit to the bottom line?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we go from a 5-day week to a 4-day week, then those 4 days could be a lot more chaotic if, let's say, the Friday is the day that nobody's working. So all of the meetings and things that need to happen would be crammed into those 4 days. I prefer a work culture where the office is open 5 days a week, but if you're the person who wants to work leisurely and stretch it out over those 5 days and that works for you, then do that. But if you're the person who wants to work hard so you can get all your work done for the week within 4 days and then not necessarily be held to being around to sitting in on meetings on Fridays, then that, could be an option as well. But I do think I agree that there's, going to be, an opposite reaction that might not all be positive if we try to compress the workload that we're used to into a shorter period of time.
Yeah. The Economist had a piece looking at which days might be best to go in, saying hybrid working may be the future, but that raises the question of how it will actually be organized. Will companies let employees choose which days to come into the office, which days they're at home? What about their working hours? If employees do get a choice, they need to strategize to maximize their visibility and minimize the stress. So they offered a few tips about which days you should work from home. And said Monday, that sets the tone for the week, typically when weekly meetings are held, so it could be a good day to go in. Tuesday, everyone hates Tuesdays, so treat yourself and stay at home. However, it may feel weird only going in for 1 day on Monday before taking a day at home. Wednesday, a good choice to work from home if you go with the Monday-Tuesday combo, not in Wednesday, and then a Thursday-Friday in the office, so good midweek break perhaps. Thursday, if you're head down in the office Monday to Wednesday, Thursday could feel like a good day to work from home and start the weekend early. However, managers may raise their eyebrows on Friday. It's too obvious a work from home day. Managers will be suspicious. If you go in Friday, typically a more relaxed day anyway, then you can sneak in some leisure time on a different day. Any thoughts on the best days to go in for you guys? If you had to go in or were thinking about going in, does it matter?
Well, I think if you're commuting and if you live in a place where the commute is pretty rough, then, Mondays and Fridays are not great days to go into the office, regardless of the work rhythm and the manager's suspicions and all of that, just in terms of getting in and out and getting around cities and fighting the traffic where people are leaving early on the weekend and stuff like that. So I vote for the middle of the week.
Yeah. What I gather from all this was there's too much manager suspicion and you shouldn't let that dictate when you go into the office. Managers are going to have to reimagine what it's like to manage people, and there's got to be more trust, there's got to be more transparency, and there's got to be a better understanding of what productivity means, not just when people show up and you can see them, but what kind of work are they doing.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point too, because part of the idea of this raised for me was like, how much of our labor is performative actually? Like, are you intentionally like scheduling an email to send at 8:30,
Yes.
so your boss knows you're putting in the hours?
Yep. That's what we've got time for working from somewhere. It's time now for dinner party data. This is the part of the show where we tell you about the most interesting thing that we've learned this week. We start with Blake, who won this week's Game of the Week. Blake, what do you want to tell the folks that you recently learned this week?
So this week I have some Halloween data, even though I believe we're a week shy. But you never know when this will be my last podcast.
You got to prep.
I don't know if Mark is going to invite me back, so I figured I'd get it in now.
This is it.
So this is from YouGov America, and they hold kids, I believe, between the ages of 8 and 14 about their favorite Halloween candy ranked. So I'll give you the top 5 most popular and the top 5 least popular. The top 5 most popular in descending order goes Reese's Peanut Butter Cup,
isn't it? I knew it was going to be peanut butter.
Obviously,
No,
it's the greatest candy ever. Then we got M&M's. Then we got Milky Way bar. Then we got Hershey's Milk Chocolate bar. A little strange, kind of bland. And then Kit Kat rounding out the top 5. And then when we go to the most hated Halloween candy among kids,
Tootsie Roll has to be.
No, it's actually black licorice.
Yes,
is the least
That's the
favorite.
Worst.
And then the second, I don't even know why this is on here because it's not. You're just an evil person if you're handing out sugar-free gum on Halloween. And then equally evil, an apple followed by minced and mixed nuts.
Oh.
So, but you know what was always the worst for me when I was a kid though is when they'd give you those little bags of pretzels. Like I have pretzels at home. What do I need a little bag of pretzels for?
Did anybody used to get a toothbrush? I feel like maybe I had a dentist living in my neighborhood.
Most likely.
Have you seen that Progressive commercial by Baker Mayfield, a quarterback of the Browns? And the kids trick or treat. He's like, he lives at the stadium is the kind of gimmick. And he's handing out nachos. And it's kind of supposed to be like a joke, like, ha ha ha, what a crazy. And I was like, oh, I would love if I were trick or treating and someone handed out nachos with like hot nacho cheese on top.
That'd be delicious.
That's the best. I know. They were making a joke of it. I was like, don't joke about that.
Yeah, I would love to show up at someone's house and get like a pot roast or, something something that's going to fill me up for a while.
A giant turkey leg.
Oh, it's a full meal. Unbelievable. Very good. Very good, very good. Let's go to Rahul.
Yeah, my data comes courtesy of the New York Times Upshot. They cited some data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that the U.S. government spends $500 annually per toddler on childcare, which I was like, in a vacuum, I was like, I don't really know what that means. But the average for rich countries was $14,436, and Norway topped the list at $29,726.
We spend $500
annually, per toddler. And so the thing that was strange to me that the article went on to explain is that once children hit school age, so I guess once they're in kindergarten, the U.S. spends the second highest amount on an annual basis per student. So for some reason, we've decided that we can like flip the switch and let the dollars flow once our kids have hit the age of 5. And I've just been thinking about it. I don't have kids, but just kind of watching a lot of my coworkers and family members struggle with childcare, especially during all the like kind of variables that the coronavirus pandemic has introduced. It just kind of struck me seeing this number.
Yeah, fantastic number. Very good. Paul, what you got?
Well, I'm going to take Blake's cue and share some Halloween data as well.
Very nice.
So we have across the street from us 4 neighbors who have 4 little boys. They range from like age 5 to 11. And we asked them over the weekend what we should be, what my wife and I should be as, like for adult costumes. And they said that she should be a witch. And actually all the women in their lives are witches, which that's a whole other subject. We're not going to touch that. And that I should be a vampire.
Who are these menaces?
So I, not the most outlandish suggestions, but it was really interesting when I looked at this National Retail Federation data, the top 10 adult costumes. So the top two are witch and vampire. So either those kids are like looking at data and they're way ahead of their time and I want to hire them, or there's just a bizarre coincidence.
You asked them and they were like, I've seen the research.
Exactly. Yeah. They're like, okay, I got some dinner party data for you, buddy.
Yeah. I'm very curious now to see, like, what would the most popular children's costumes be? I guess it changes a lot year to year, but... Oh, you got those too?
Spider-Man, Princess. All right, so the top one is Spider-Man, number 2, Princess, 3, Batman, 4, Superhero, and 5 is Witch. So there's some overlap there.
Okay.
You know, as a kid,
nice.
though, you can only be Spider-Man once until you realize how uncomfortable that mask is, and then it's over.
I was hoping that Spider-Man Princess was one costume.
It should be. There's Superman is down the list, and then Avengers characters and zombies are up there too. So it's quite a mix.
Very nice. I've got 2 for you real quick. The first one is, this is for Blake. Shout out to the golf fans. Golf is becoming more and more popular somehow. Jason Notty of Adweek notes a couple of golf stats for you. First of all, 37 million people, believe it or not, played golf in 2020. That's 8% more than 2019, according to the National Golf Federation, NGF, of which Blake is the chairman, so we can't read too much into these numbers. Secondly, while the number of on-course golfers grew 2% to 25 million, that's the same number who were golfing in 2014. Golf's biggest growth comes from off-course activity, driving ranges and simulators. In 2014, less than 15 million golfers told the NGF that they played off-course. By 2020, that had grown from 15 million to 24 million. Also, there's an obvious overlap between players who can play on course and also in simulators. However, 12 million folks are exclusively range and simulator players. They've never walked on a fairway in 2020, so they're becoming their own market. Also, 1 out of 10 golfers, which is 3 million people in 2020, were beginners who'd never been to a golf course, driving range, or simulator before. That's a 20% increase in novice golfers from 2019, with the NGF saying that a healthy proportion are women and children. Over 500,000 women took up golf in some form last year, putting the number of women who play golf at over 6 million. It's for the first time since 2007. And then kids increased their golf participation by 24% to 3.1 million golfers who are under the age of 17. Finally, 9 and 18-hole golf rounds grew by roughly 14% in 2020, despite half of the nation's 16,000 courses closing amid COVID-19 in March and April.
I wonder if we're going to see golfers show up on the top 10 Halloween costumes next year if this keeps up.
I just want to say to all those new golfers out there, 8-stroke maximum and speed it up, please, because I've seen you all out there, and I'm really sick of playing 5-hour rounds. Please, just speed it up.
There we go.
Well,
it's still a terrible game.
There it goes your 4-day work week, Blake. You've got at least 1 day of golfing and the weekend. Right?
Second thing I've got for you real quick. Science says that dogs really are happy to see you. Research has proven that, like humans, the brains of dogs release a happy neurotransmitter, oxytocin, when they encounter loved ones and anyone that they consider to be a friend. Studies have compared this same event between wolves and humans, only to prove that wolves don't have the same oxytocin effect. Dogs, therefore, are the best. Anyone who disagrees isn't trustworthy. That's what we've got time for this episode. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you to Blake.
Thank you.
He won this week's Game of the Week. Thank you to Paul.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you to Rahul.
Thanks, guys.
And thank you to Victoria. She edits the show. Thanks to everyone listening. If you've got any questions, podcast@emarketer.com. You can send those in. Just say hi. We'll see you guys on Monday, hopefully for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Newstar. Happy weekends.